We've covered a lot of theory so far, and I want to get stuck in building out a bit of a bigger application in CDK. So we're going to build an application called Brush Your Teeth. And the Brush Your Teeth app will remind you daily to, as the name would suggest, brush your teeth. We're only going to send one notification a day, and I hope you are brushing more frequently than that. But it'll serve as a little bit of a basic example for us to wire a few bits and pieces together and talk about how we do that. So we're going to start off with an EventBridge event bus, and every account has a EventBridge in there by default. An event bus in there, EventBridge event bus. And that's used for notifications to do with Amazon services or AWS services like config or S3 or similar, or code pipeline. And the EventBridge service used to be called CloudWatch Events. So if you heard CloudWatch Events before, then EventBridge is the same thing. It's just been renamed. And in this case, we're going to have an EventBridge rule. Now, we're not actually going to look for a certain type of event on the event bus that's present in our account, but we're going to do one based on a schedule instead. And that's how we're going to trigger something every day, once a day. That EventBridge rule is going to call a Lambda function. So we'll pop that in there. And this is going to be our notification Lambda function. And then finally, we're going to use SES to send an email. So I'll pop, where's SES? Here we go, slightly different icon scheme, so excuse the fact that they're different. But we'll send an email using SES. So that's the main three components of the application we're going to build. And obviously there are bits and pieces surrounding that we would probably want to put in as well. So for example, the Lambda function we're building should log to a CloudWatch log group. And so, something has got to make a CloudWatch log group. Obviously we can give Lambda permission to write to that log group, or we could make the log group for it. And to have permissions to be able to do anything like that, including writing to the log group, we of course have to have an IAM role. So let's see if I can find the matching scheme for that. I can't, so let's go with the other style for now. So the Lambda function will also need an IAM role. So there's some things to think about to do with connecting these bits and pieces together. And so we'll see in CDK what we have to make manually and what is provided for us. So there's our simple diagram in diagrams.net if you're wondering what this tool is. So let's pop over to the existing application we had, and we're just going to use our getting started stack for now. I don't think there's any reason why we can't use that. And just to remove some of the noise, I'm going to take out everything that we've made so far. And now we're not actually using any of these props yet. We're not using the log level prop, so we might clean that up in a little moment, but we'll leave it in there. So we're always going to start at the application level, which is here in our bin folder. And you could have multiple stacks for your application. In this case, we've got one stack, and that's fine. That's plenty good enough for our use cases. And so inside of our stack, you will end up in the constructor. And then typically, you'll start adding resources here. But obviously, that gets quite noisy if you're adding a lot of resources. So you might choose to do some of the construction of that in some methods instead of this class. And I normally do those as private methods because I don't expect them to be called from anywhere else. So for example, if we've got a EventBridge rule, we could do this dot create EventBridge. Let's call it EventBridge schedule. And I can do that, and then WebStorm's going to say, "Hey, you haven't done that. Oops, sorry, you haven't made that method. So let's make that here." And then we can do an EventBridge event rule. And of course, you can do the import aliasing that is quite idiomatic or quite commonly seen, where you would import EventBridge and then do new EventBridge.rule. We're just going to create it as a new rule here, but it's up to you, what kind of style of importing you want. We have to attach a construct that we're initializing to something, so we can attach it to this, which is the current stack. We've got to give it a name, and I'm going to give it a camel case name so that persists into the name of the physical resource that gets created. So let's call this brush your teeth schedule. And then let's give it some properties. So we can go and have a look at the class itself. And this will take us to the TypeScript types in WebStorm, which I'm using, but it might be different in your editor. I can pop over to rule props, and here's a pretty nicely documented set of the rules that we're going to use. So enabled here is optional, and it's going to default to true, so we won't necessarily pass that in. And then we've got a property called schedule, and schedule is a class, and there are some static methods for constructing this. But sometimes it can be a little bit tricky to know how you initialize a thing that's here. And I want to have a very brief flip over to what this resource looks like in CloudFormation. So I think it's called AWS Events Rule, maybe something like that. Yeah, there we go. So let's look at the CloudFormation one, which is going to be very similar to the AWS API. And that has got a event pattern, event bus name, a schedule expression. Okay, so schedule expression sounds like the thing that we want. And that is just a string here. So you might be thinking, oh, is that just a CloudFormation thing? So let's go and have a look for AWS EventBridge API. And we can go and find the API that we think will be used for creating our event rule. So we've got something that sounds like rule. Enable rule, put rule, there we go. That sounds good. And we can find the properties of this API call. And again, it's schedule expression. And again, it's a string. So CloudFormation has stayed pretty close to the underlying AWS API. But when we look at this in CDK, it's something else. It's a class. And this is quite a good example of where CDK is trying to provide a better developer experience on top of the API. And sometimes that means that if we know how the API works, or we know how the CloudFormation resource works, or how this resource works in a different infrastructure as code provider, we might have to translate that knowledge into CDK. I think it helps to put an object-oriented mindset on and say, okay, how can we model this in OO principles? So if we go back to that schedule class, or abstract class, I should say, you can see we've got three options. So one is an expression, one is a rate, and one is a cron value. And so in the API, you can see two examples of those. And then if we look at the difference between expression and cron, so expression is just a string, and then cron has been taken one step further actually, and is now a separate interface this time rather than a class. And so rather than having to know the cron syntax, which we can still use if we want, we can now provide an object with the fields in. So it's up to you really which you think is best for your scenario, which you prefer. You know, you could do the expression if you wanted to. You could specify the rate, and that's another abstraction there. It's a duration rather than say in the API or CloudFormation resource where it's just a string. Or we can use the cron with this set of options. So let's do that. Let's use cron. So let's pass in the schedule property. And let's say that's going to be schedule.cron, and then inside of there we can, oops, sorry, I've got to import that. And inside of there we can say that it's going to be every morning, isn't it? So let's see what options we've got in here: minute, hour, day, month, year, and weekday. So I'm just going to copy these across. I'm not going to do weekday because we're going to specify a day instead. And I'm going to lop off these comments here. Clean this up a little bit so we can use it as properties, and then we can clear those off and do the same here, like so. And I'm just going to put it as an asterisk for everything. Whoops. And then let's set a time for this. So this is going to be in UTC, and at the moment we're in British summertime where I am. So I would like actually this to be at 6 o'clock in UTC, so I get a nice reminder at 7 a.m. in the morning. Okay, so that's our schedule set up there. And you might be thinking, right, well, you know, I kind of get the abstraction. I kind of see what they're going for, but I'd quite like to verify this. I'd quite like to make sure this is what I expect it to be. And the easiest way to do that is to do a synth. So I'm just going to set up authentication here, and then we can do npm run synth. Whoops. Because we have that synth package script set up. So we're calling CDK synth, but we are using the version of CDK specified in this project. And you can see that it's plopped it out to the terminal, which is going to get pretty unwieldy pretty quickly. So let's redirect that into template.yaml, and then we can go and have a look at it there. So here's our CloudFormation resource, our AWS events rule, and we see we've got a cron expression, which is minutes, hours, and then the rest of the fields. And there's a bit of a weird thing with the AWS cron syntax in that it's slightly non-standard, and there's a specifier for a day and a specifier for the day of the week, and you can't use both, and the one you don't use has to be a question mark, which always throws me. Always a bit weird. But it's got state enabled, it's got the default there, which is lovely, and then it's got that cron expression. So it's up to you really if you think this is easier to use or not. I think if you're from a development background, the abstractions can be really, really helpful and really well done. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of working out of how you translate things into the object-oriented version to then get it into the AWS version. So let's return this rule here. And I'm just going to return the same class that we are defining when we do this. I will note that if you click onto the rule class and you go and see where it's defined, there is an interface, but the interface doesn't have everything that we might want when we're manipulating this event rule later. For example, we're going to add a target to it. So just something to bear in mind, if you're very used to working with interfaces, I would probably stick with the concrete class instead.